So we'll get started. So welcome to Safe Return to Sport, a guide for coaches. My name is Robin. I'm a certified athletic therapist, and I've been certified for the past 15 years and have been involved in sport in a non-participant role for over 20. So I've kind of done the gamut of coaching and working in more of a sport rec area all the way to being the athletic therapist. So I've been in your guys' spot as a coach before. So as we're getting back to sport, it's important to remember that the reason why the kids are excited and are there, and hopefully why you're there, is that you're excited to play and you want to be there. And more than likely, the kids are just going to be happy to be out of the house and being allowed to see their friends and you as their coach. So there's joy in just being able to come back to sport. A little bit of a disclaimer. So what I'm going to give you tonight is not the hand of God. It's some guidelines you can follow, maybe give you some more insight on what you can do for your team or organization. So you do need to follow your national sport organization or your provincial sport organization, as well as your provincial guidelines, and then any federal guidelines as well that come into play. So COVID-19 and physical activity, there's lots of information coming out about what we can do and what can't do and how everything's transmitted. So the important thing to know is that COVID-19 is transmitted through droplet transmission. So it's not airborne, but the droplets that occur when you breathe, cough, sneeze, yell, when we get into the spectator area, the virus is contained in that. So if we are in an indoor sport, we have a higher rate of transmission versus outdoor. And if we are doing close contact, we have a higher rate of transmission. The reason why we clean everything is because if you touch a contaminated surface and then touch your eyes, mouth, and nose, so again, we're not supposed to touch our face, and it's very hard to teach our young ones not to touch our face as well. Mask wearing is encouraged for those that are not participating directly in the sport. Coaches, those on the sidelines, can wear one, but if they are actively doing something, the masks are not encouraged. And then participant hygiene. So we have to remember, you as a coach, you are a participant as well. So we need to wash our hands regularly for 20 to 30 seconds. Have hand sanitizer stations out depending upon the area that you are in, or if it's not provided for you in your facility. Carry a sanitizer with you so you have your own. Encourage your athletes to do as well if they can. A major thing in sports is we have to encourage our athletes to not spit or clear our nasal passages. Those in baseball, having spits or chew isn't good. I know in lots of sports, it's common to spit, and we have to encourage our athletes not to, and be the example to not to as well. Again, so we want to avoid touching our face. If your sport involves gloves, so football and catching, we need to encourage them not to touch their face even with the gloves on. And then cleaning the gloves like you would clean your hands after you're done. For equipment, so every sport is going to be a little bit different, and I am going to kind of talk in a general sense, just based on it, hard to get into specifics without going straight into exactly what the sport organization suggests. But if your sport involves equipment, please try and encourage them to use their own equipment and bring it. You want to only use equipment that can be disinfected when it's done. So before you decide how you're going to disinfect and what equipment to bring out, you need to look to see if your balls can be disinfected and what type of cleaner you can use to do so. If you are sharing, we need to clean them regularly. if possible, during cleaning. If not, it needs to be cleaned after your training session is done, or if you are playing games, it needs to be cleaned after those training sessions and games. So if we are going back to training, it is recommended that if you can do your training outside, to do so. So for some sports, if we're not going to be doing specific games or needing to be on the ice, let's say for hockey, let's take it outside and use the advantage of being in that outdoor space. So you need to keep your participants 2 meters apart. There is a 3 meter apart recommendation for sports which involve high level activities. So if you're going to be running kind of, let's say, calisthenics or an aerobic based training session, it is encouraged for you to do 3 meters apart instead of 2 meters, just based on the increase of intensity. Modify your training sessions as you are able to. And then we are going to look at the risk assessment form from the Canadian Association for Sports and Exercise Medicine. So this can be done for clubs and or teams. You can fill out the top part. So doing your initial risk assessment, you're going to answer the following questions, and you're either going to put a 1 or a 0. So if you are in the Edmonton area or mainly in Alberta, currently you're probably going to say 1, that there is still active cases. Depending upon your venue, you need to just answer whether or not, yes, you're sharing it or you're not, which is why the outdoor spaces are good, because then you're getting that 0, which is decreasing your risk. No one should currently have anybody coming in from out of area, but if you do, that would be the relocation area. High risk. So talking about high risk, the comorbidities that we want to focus on are surprisingly not asthma. It's down on the list, but things like diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease, those are your more likely chance to have severe reactions or severe symptoms if they do get COVID-19. So you need to look at that when looking at your athletes and coaches and staff. So is it high risk? So high risk is going to be ones where there isn't the ability to social distance within your training. And then are you doing your training outside of just your sport? So your dry land, your weights, conditioning. So then you get your total. So 1s or 0s. And then you get your risk assessment score. So we would love to be 0 and 1s. More than likely, most of us are going to be between 2s and 4s, and which lets you know you can try and do some modification. If you are in the 5 or 6, you either should not train, or you need to go into the modification to see what you can do. So after doing that, you go through your modifications and then redo your score. So are you able to social distance? Are you able to restrict who's in the facility? Are you sharing? Has everybody quarantined for 14 days if they've come in from out of region? So you go through your modifications and redo your score. And again, you get your list. So I will, at the end, if you want, there'll be a bunch of links. I can send them out to you so that you guys can have these to do for yourself. There is also the mitigation checklist, which goes into much more detail and specificity for your group and gives you ideas of what you can do to help lower your risk. So if you're going through and you've decided that distancing just won't work, that we can't run our training process by maintaining the 2 meter to 3 meter distance, I ask that you look at it again. We all get very used to creating our plans and coming up with this is how we're going to do it. So look at it again and see if there's another way to run your training. If you can't, then you can create your cohort groups. A sport cohort can be up to 50 people, and you have to remember that it's coaches, team staff, participants, and officials. So currently the state we're at, most of us will having to just look at coaches, team staff, and participants. But if we do get to games, or you are considering games, you have to consider officials in that 50 as well. So what your cohort is 50 people who are always together. You train together. When we get to games, they play together, and it always stays that group of 50. So if you decide to make a group of 50 for training, you cannot then play games with another group of 50. So your 50 people max includes if you're going to compete. So keep that in mind when making your training plans, and if you're planning on trying to get to a stage where you will compete. We highly suggest that you use the same cohort for each session. So if you're practicing Tuesday, Thursdays, you have the same people there on Tuesdays and Thursdays and not switching them off. And it's very important to stress to your athletes and your parents that they cannot be part of 2 sport cohorts at once. So they cannot be part of, let's say, training with their school team on Monday and then training with you on Tuesday. So they have to choose who they're going to train with during this time so that they are not crossing into cohorts. So screening, this is again something you're going to go back to your PSO and your organization for, but it's something you can do when you're coming in so that you are aware and making your parents and athletes feel safe in coming to training. So doing a symptom screen is important. Don't rely on temperature as your be-all end-all, as temperature is a later symptom in regards to COVID-19, and it's kind of one of those, if they have the fever, then they already you've been exposed, and they've probably been exposed. So if you are using temperature, it is important to allow for an acclimatization period around about 10 minutes to ensure that you're getting their current temperature instead of what they got from coming in outside. So this definitely comes in play once we start hitting October and November when the weather's cooler. So if it is -10 outside and you come in and take their temperature right away, it is not going to show their pure temperature. It's going to show what's affected by them being outside. For screening, you can do paper versus online, and that's a choice that either you or your organization can make. Just making sure that you are keeping track of who has it and what dates. So if you're doing a paper one, have folders that you can have for each date so you can keep track of each athlete. Refer to your PSO guidelines in regards to keeping documents like that, as well as following FOIP policies. We do recommend you keep those for the 14 days from the training date, so that you can refer back to who was all at that training date when someone was there. So sideline management, those of you who are not out in the field playing or participating in the practice, or if we get to games who are not on field for that, try and clean your hands as much as possible. Again, cleaning gloves. We'll talk about how to limit celebrations later, but it's ingrained in sport to do so, so we have to stress to our athletes how not to. We don't share water bottles, so I definitely think of things like football and hockey on this one where everybody kind of shares the water bottles and you have the big cooler. There should be no sharing of water bottles, and encourage your athletes to wash them between their sessions. So it's not one of those throw the water in their bag and then when you see them again it's the same water bottle. They should be washing them in between. That should be occurring normally. This just is a good way to start encouraging them to have proper hygiene and cleanliness through normal times. For the young coaches there. Oops. For the young coaches, no post-game snack, no halftime oranges. And then back to the screening is to keep track of who was there so that you can, if someone does come forward and say they have tested positive or they are experiencing symptoms, you know how long to go back for and who to contact to let them know. So the what if, so what happens if someone does come forward and say they have showed symptoms, or someone eventually comes forward and says that they have been tested positive for COVID-19. So if someone shows up to symptoms, you have to have a plan in place. This isn't one of those times to fly by the seat of our pants and figure out what to do. So before you come back to training, and if you already have come back to training, this is something that you should start to implement. So know what you're going to do if someone shows up and during their screen they're like, oh no, I do have a cough now and it is new, or they do have a fever. How are you going to respond? First thing, you will send them home immediately. Do not let them interact with any members of the team. And then you need to decide whether or not you're going to cancel that session or progress. Your PSO or home organization might be able to give you guidance on that. Having read some of the PSO's guidelines, they're vague in some instances and others are very detailed, so refer back to that when making these decisions. What happens if they are tested positive? Then again, follow your PSO or organization guidelines. This is why you have your daily participant lists, so you can go back to and let all those people know. And then you want to not have any activities for the 14 days. So if someone has shows symptoms, you can continue if they haven't had direct contact with. But if they are testing positive, you should cease training for everybody for those 14 days. Touching on camps, so these are non-sport organization camps. Because I've seen a lot of everybody's excited to get back into doing some form of training and needing to do something over the summer, and sport camps is kind of one of our go-tos. So they are a good way to get back in the groove, but before you register your kid or before you start to run one, you need to determine whether or not you are under the sport organization's purview and guidance. So if you are running one, make sure you are following both your sport and provincial guidelines. That does cover yourself and all the athletes who will be attending. One thing you want to determine, are you assuming that they become a cohort, or are you going to do a distancing type training and camp? And it should be focused on technique and skill acquisition, and we will get into how is training and practices what we should be focusing on. So injuries do often occur when we are doing too much too soon after doing too little for too long. So we do typically see higher rate of injuries when we come into the normal start of a season. But in knowing that right now we don't have a normal start of a season. Every athlete has been doing something different at home, whether be it what they have the ability to do in their space, whether they have had the time to do it, and as well as the family factors as to whether or not it's been encouraged for them to do stuff. And either way, we cannot be upset with the athletes based on what level they've been doing. So as a coach, you are going to be in charge of looking at your schedule. We want to ease in. Okay, think of yourself as the jockey and your athletes are the horses. We do not want to break out of that starting gate too fast and then not have enough for the end of the race. So you're going to want to do shorter sessions at the start and build up their endurance and their ability to participate in sport, both general conditioning and sport specific. We should not be doing 2 a days, and you should be at least 1 day between your sessions if able to. When doing your scheduling, you have to account for cleaning your equipment afterwards. and your screening time beforehand. So if you were used to running a class, if let's say you were in martial arts, and your class is typically 45 minutes, you might have to drop your class down to a half an hour to allow to clean your space and to screen the athletes coming in. Another thing with screening is that you can have it done before, especially if you were doing a online version, let's say Google Docs. You can have them do it 2 hours before arrival, but no more than that. And that can decrease your screening time, but you have to make sure you have the time to have looked at their results before and their answers before you allow them into practice and training. So practice planning, as you're going to see, I'm going to really suggest that starting off slow because of that difference in what everyone's been doing. You're going to have that athlete who has been going hardcore every day while they've been in isolation, and now that they're able to get outside, and you're going to have athletes who have done very little and who have had to spend while they were at school sitting in front of their computer for 8+ hours a day because of the amount of workload they had, or they've just chosen to sit and play Xbox for 15 hours a day. So make sure you are aware that not everyone's going to be at the same spot, and it's going to be different than a normal year as to where they're at. So even if they have been going full out at home or partially out at home, nothing is the same as being in the gym, at the field, at the diamond, or the rink. They need to get back to their sport level, not just their training level at home. Most people don't, if you involve jumping, they don't have the ability to jump as high at home that they would in a gym. They don't have the space to be running as much, so there is going to be a difference in their normal training level. So your first few sessions should be about skill assessment, looking at what the athletes can do and where they're at. Some will be better than they were before the break, or if you had seen them from last year, some will be about the same, and some may actually have decreased their level of skill. This could be from them growing. This could just be from a level of detraining, and you need to know where all your athletes are at before you start throwing different skills and what you want to do on them. So your first few practices are going to be more about skill assessment versus what we need to do. And we want to limit those repetitive motions, and that's part of injury prevention as well. So as much as we want to focus on skill development, we have to figure out other ways to do so. So types of practices. We can do conditioning, we can work on strength. This is a great time to do all those things you never have time to do in a normal season. If you have athletes that jump or throw, we can work on their technique, work on landings, work on proper follow-throughs. And then again, let's focus on tactics. It should be all about skill and developing the athlete's overall abilities to do things. Make your practices fun. You're going to want fun practices. The kids are going to want fun practices. They have, as much as we maybe as parents have tried to shield them from what's going on, they're very aware. They missed how many months of school. Their life changed. They do hear the news, and it's hard for them not to know what's going on in some capacity. So the athletes need some fun. So this is kind of the time where it's great to just let them play, let them come up with fun things to do, and try and, if you're going to do, you could do like mini relay competitions in some aspect to give them some fun and enjoyment. So when looking at skill development, we can look at the fundamental movements. So 3 areas of fundamental movements that we should see across all training for any sport is balance, locomotor, and ball skills. And this is very much for long-term athlete development as well, and what you should be seeing happen in young students when they're at school. So balance skills are how you can remain in place and turn around and pivot. Okay, so standing on 1 foot, standing on 2 feet, how are they able to hold that position? We need to work on running, jumping, hopping, galloping. Okay, those are our locomotor skills. So how do they move through space? And then ball skills. So no matter what sport you're doing, ball skills still are a fundamental movement. So catch, throw, kick, how to roll a ball like you're going to bowl, and how to strike a ball. So incorporate those in your skill assessments and as well as your skill developments. You also can try something new. As I said, this is the time to do things differently, do all those things you don't normally have time to do. And it's also a great excuse for you as a coach to do those things you've wanted to do in the past but have never been able to find the time or the way to implement them. So you could bring injury prevention programs in, and they're a great thing to do. They are great for warm-ups, and you don't have to tell your parents or your athletes that they're in an injury prevention program. But you as a coach can know that you're going to get around a 40% decrease in lower body injuries. And for those that work with females, that actually goes up to 75%. And recent studies have shown that we're actually seeing a decrease in shoulder injuries as well with these programs. So many people think they're only for, the common ones are for ACL, so we only are going to do them in soccer, basketball, football, sports where we see those ACL injuries, but they're actually really great to do for the throwing sports, based on everything that they learn in that. Think outside the box, talk to coaches that work in other sports, pick their brains, figure out things to do, because you cannot in a 1 hour practice necessarily focus on training the whole time, but you also can't necessarily do a scrimmage yet. So kind of pick outside of the box games that you can do with your athletes to make it fun and keep things fresh. You can bring in experts. They can help you in many ways. They can educate you in regards to injury prevention and skill development. You can give the opportunity to help improve and increase your athletes' education and knowledge of many areas. And it's always great to show something new. So you can bring in a yoga instructor, and the athletes may find it interesting and fun because it's different. But you as a coach now know that you're working on improving some of their fundamental movements, as well as some things that might help with injury prevention. So as every sport is going to be a little bit different, you might get to start competing as we progress. Some sports are allowed to compete right now. But before we go full-fledged into competing, we want to make sure we start with small scrimmages. This is to help with injury prevention. It's that going from 0 to 100. So we can't practice 1 week and then play the next. Our bodies are not ready for that. So you can start in team scrimmages, 3-on-3, 4-on-4, and slowly progressing up to you can do, if able to with the numbers, full team scrimmages. If you get to go to opponents, make sure that it is allowed based on your PSO, and as well as keeping within that 50-person cohort at the moment. If you were given the option, it's okay to not compete. Make sure you're making the right decisions for your athletes and not feeling the pressure to do so just because that's what's supposed to happen. We're supposed to train, we're supposed to compete. It's okay to have a season that's about working on your athletes' ability to do their skills and make them stronger for next year. So if making a decision, are they ready to compete? Are they conditioned and ready to be in a full game? And are their skills up to par to where they need to be? So we kind of talked a little bit earlier about no high fives, no fist bumps. So sportsmanship, and it's not only with other teams, it's also within their own team. So you need to figure out ways that they can congratulate each other, that they can encourage each other, that doesn't involve being in contact. I do know sports that are in cohorts right now, and they are encouraging non-contact ways of celebrating as well, just to help decrease that level and closeness. So involve your athletes, ask them, they're going to come up with stuff that you as the coach can't think of. So involve the athletes in your decision. As always, make it fun, but make sure it follows the sportsmanship rules of your game. So you could do things like tipping of the hat, dances, songs. There's a few NHL teams now that they're getting back into training. They're showing what they're doing, and it's kind of interesting to see what they've come up with as well. So injury prevention. You need to think of training right now as a marathon, not a sprint. So we go back to that jockey. We don't want to go out of the gates full bore. So slowly progress. Doesn't mean that we progress through a practice as well as through our training schedule. Focus on technique, skill, and fundamental movements. And even though we are working on skills, we want to decrease the number of repetitions we are doing, because that's going to help us decrease that level of injury chance of repetitive and overworks. So it's not about just kicking over and over again. It's about breaking down the kick into different parts of the skill and working on that. You can do a whole practice on kicking without kicking the whole practice. So it goes back to those things you learned in your courses. There's lots of online, depending on your sport, ways to look at to do it. You can do conditioning and strengthening as well. Avoid activities that are higher risk for injury. So if you're in a sport that's allowed to contact, do we need to contact yet? Do we need to start hitting? Do we need to do tumbling if, let's say, we're in a gymnastics or rhythmic type event and sport? So don't push the activities you don't have to do if there's a higher risk for injury. 2 reasons for that. A, we don't want to have our athletes get injured early on or at all. And secondly, it comes into the management part and how you're going to manage those injuries. So injury prevention programs, there's the FIFA 11 Plus, that's ACL injury prevention program that was designed for soccer. They have seen it work in many sports and have seen injuries decrease in not only for knees, but into ankles and hips as well. And as I said, are showing decreases in shoulder injuries. There is the U of C Sport Injury Research Center has a neuromuscular program that you can use as your warm-up, and I've done it. It's very simple, yet there's progressions, which is good, so that you can start it now and progress through the season, or you can start it now and have ways to progress next year with your athletes. There are a lot of area-specific programs you're going to see for hamstrings, groins, shoulders. Look into them and see what applies to your sport and your team. It benefits if you were with the same group of athletes that you were last year, and you can know what injuries you had last year and what you want to prevent this year. So a good injury prevention program will involve not only agility, strength, and balance, but some form of aerobic, especially if it is being used as part of a warm-up. So what happens if you do have an athlete get injured? Pretty much the standard recommendation right now is to let family members deal with the injury and treat it. If you do have designated staff, they are allowed to, that is their job, let them do that as well, but try as a coach to be a little less hands-on at the moment than you would normally. If you have an EAP, and you should, so your emergency action plan needs to be adjusted right now, because you're going to have to take in some other considerations in regards to how you were going to assess that athlete, the management you're going to have, and whether or not you're going to call the ambulance. If you have an unresponsive athlete, first aid and CPR guidelines at the moment are you have the choice to only do compression CPR, or if you do have a pocket mask and feel comfortable, you are able to do breaths. We do want to try and limit the overload on our health system. We are doing okay here in Alberta, but I stress in all my injury prevention and management classes is if we don't need to call, we shouldn't call. And as a coach, we should try and find where we're comfortable with what we're dealing with. But if you do, when you should call is if any of your athletes are complaining of pain in the spine. I've found through the years everyone talks about neck injuries, but we have to remember that the spine goes from the neck to all the way down through our low back. So we do need to remember that we can have any pain in that area, you should call an ambulance. If they have uncontrolled bleeding, if they are in cardiac or respiratory arrest, and if you have open fractures or hip or ankle dislocations, those are times when you should call an ambulance. And it's also a good opportunity for you as a coach to work on and find ways to discover how to become more comfortable with dealing with injuries in your specific sport. If you are dealing with an injury, make sure you are wearing your PPE, so have a mask on. You can wear your gloves because you'll be in more close contact with that athlete. So, injury awareness. There is an increased chance of injury because of the longer down period, and your athletes are more likely to be sore. And you need to understand and explain to them the difference between soreness and prolonged pain. So if after a session they have some pain and it goes away the next day, that's good. If the pain does not go away and stays at the same level, that is a point in time they should go and seek treatment from either an athletic therapist, a physiotherapist, or whoever they normally see if they are injured. Due to the stress that our athletes are under right now, they're going to have tension in the body and apprehension, and those increase the chance to be injured. Tight muscles have a tendency to not move as well of the physiology, and so there's increased chance of injury. So be aware that they're going to be more stressed and have more body tension, and you need to help them find ways in their warm-up to decrease that tension. And so again, as you can tell, I'm really suggesting focusing on condition and technique. So it is said that the injury happens when too much is done too soon or too fast. So remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and you are the jockey of the horses and you need to keep them at a nice pace. One of the good things I could say that has come out of COVID-19 is the focus on mental health of athletes and our youth as well. It's kind of been it's been an adult issue, and this has brought into light that we need to be worried about our kids, our youth athletes, in regards to their mental health. So as a coach, you need to be understanding in regards to not every athlete's going to be completely gung-ho about coming back to sport. They may have a family member at home who falls into a higher risk, and they may be concerned about coming into training and if they are going to end up transmitting to, and even just a common cold to that said family member. So you need to be understanding and accepting that everyone is going to have a varying degree of comfort, and you yourself may have some hesitation in regards to what can and cannot be done under the new guidelines. We all are stressed, the kids are stressed, we see it at home. Be aware of that. So the kids might not be as cheerful and outgoing initially, but let's see if they come back to their normal selves after a few sessions. Excuse me. Be very clear to your parents and athletes as regards to the protocols that you are going to bring into your training and into your team. If you are going to make a change of plans, let everybody know ahead of time. I know when things went from we were not allowed to be training to things allowed to start training, everybody in an instant thought, and not everybody, people thought in an instant it was going to change. And we're making changes that day because they were allowed to under the guidelines. But what you have to be aware of is not everyone might be prepared for that change. So make sure you let your participants and parents know what's going to happen. So if you have to change your training, let them know. And that even goes back to if you have to cut back on things, try and give them a heads up so they can be prepared. You as a coach must have patience. Everything is different for you, for the athletes for the parents, and we all are responding differently, and so you must give a little bit of leeway in how you are going to respond to them. So when it comes to athlete-specific things and getting them through this time of COVID-19 and the return to sport, the structure of sport and having a schedule is going to help them if they are kind of feeling a little lost and unsure what's going on. Having a coming back to sport should be good for most athletes, and be aware that they have maybe experiencing a sense of loss. They didn't get to finish their school year. Their end of winter into spring sport may have been changed. They haven't been able to see many of their friends other than through their phones or their computers. They haven't seen family members. So in some ways they're going to have a sense of loss, and they're going to be showing that in different ways. We all have the fear of the unknown. Every time we leave our house, we're not sure what's going to happen, and the athletes are going to show that as well. So if you have an athlete who is struggling a little bit and unsure of what to do, we can set them goals as to what they can achieve within a practice or within a training period. Reaffirm how they are feeling. If you were kind of in between, like we're training one week, not training, or we haven't geared up into training yet, try and stay in touch with your athletes. So for the athletes that may have fallen behind, so they're not where they thought they should be, or they've gone backwards and are showing less skill development than they had the year before, make sure you're being caring and supportive. Find the positives in things they're doing and help them find the little victories. This is a great time for them to determine what success is, and their definition of what success was in March is going to be different than what it is now. So you need to help guide them in that. They may be feeling extra pressure. They've seen lots of athletes at home working out, getting stronger, getting better, and they may not have had that opportunity. So they may be feeling that they should be better than they are. They may be anxious when coming in. So in doing your warm-ups, maybe incorporate some breathing exercises to help them prepare for training. But one of the biggest things you as their coach is to be positive and help guide them into those new goals and finding those little victories. And this is where this Steve Young quote comes in, is that the principle is competing against yourself. It's about self-improvement, about being better than you were the day before. So if you do have that athlete who is struggling, you can help by reminding them that they need to compare themselves to themselves and not to others. So if you have a Johnny and a Billy, Johnny may have been your star athlete last year, and due to many things could now not be as good as he was last year, and Billy has improved. Well, Johnny may be comparing himself to Billy, and you need to remind him that he should only be comparing him to himself. Let athletes have a bad day. We're not always going to be on, so they can have a bad training day, and that's quite okay. So let them have the bad days and remind them that as long as they are finding some improvement or something that they've found to work on, then it's been a successful day. So one of the things I found when working on the mental health stuff was this Canada approach. So this is something that if you are noticing an athlete struggling, or you as a coach, if you're finding yourself having a hard time, you can use this approach. So you're going to check in, acceptance, navigate, adapt, discuss, and act. And then, as I said, I'll give you guys the links later. But in some ways we can use this on a daily basis. So with the checking in, the athlete is asking themselves, how are they feeling? So what it looks like, what it sounds like, and what it feels like. And these are the 3 zones. So you have the green, yellow, and red zone. This can actually be incorporated into your symptom checklist. You can have them day are they, what zone they're in. And then that'll give you and them an idea on how they can change training for that day. I've seen teachers implement when they come in, when their students come in for the day, they can give like a thumbs up, a thumbs sideways, or a thumbs down. And it helps the teacher know how to help that student that day. So you as a coach can kind of implement a similar thing so that you know if you have an athlete comes in and they say they're in the red zone and they haven't slept well in the last couple of days and they're just finding that whatever they can't do, it doesn't work, you can then help guide them and be aware of how they're going to respond that day and be that helpful person instead of being on them constantly. The next, acceptance. So asking what you can control. So for an athlete, the best way to point out is they can control themselves. They can control their effort, they can control how they respond to the team and how they're working well with the team, and what are they giving back. If things are not going well, and this grounding thing can be done any point in time, when if they're having a bad practice or things just aren't going as smooth as they thought, you can do the 5 things. So 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 you can smell, and 1 you can taste. And they're all within your space. So if you're baseball and you're outside, things you could see could be the backstop, a baseball, a bat, the plate, and the grass. Okay, so have them focus on stuff around them, and it gives a good way to ground, and then you can reassess and get going forward. It is also important to know that not every athlete is going to be down. So they may be in that red zone or in the yellow zone, and they might actually be up. They might be over anxious. They might be over enthused, and you need this grounding can help bring them down. So it helps even if they're up or down to bring them to their ideal place to train. So you're going to adapt, so change things in regards to your day. So if they know they're having a bad day, or if they're not being able to hit well or kick well that day, maybe they can decide to take a break, because breaks are always good. As we've all found out, having to stare at our computers for copious amounts of our day, taking a break and coming back can always help. So how are they going to adjust and adapt? Have someone to discuss with. They can talk to you, they can talk to a teammate, a family member, as to how they're feeling. And it doesn't necessarily have to be they're having a bad day at training, or it could be that they're having a bad day or a bad week. There is some mental health resources that you can go to. And this is from the Canadian Centre for Mental Health in Sport. So again, they can go to Kids Help Phone. There is this Big White Wall Canada, so that is where they can talk to a peer, which is good. So if they don't feel comfortable talking to their teammates or their friends, they can talk to someone who is in their age groups. And again, I will give you those links. So they're going to act. So what are they going to do to adapt? So this is when a good way to set out goals for the session as well as for the season, and what actions they're going to take. So let's say you have a soccer goalie and they're having a hard time tracking the ball. What are they going to be able to do to improve the tracking of the ball? So it's not just their goal, of course, is to be able to do it, but how are they going to do it? This approach is, I've found, really actually good to address any incidents, not only if they are having mental health symptoms, but they can approach it to kind of any part of training or difficulty. So if they're having more than just a bad day, right? So if they're having any mental health symptoms of change in behavior or communication, they're more irritable, they are becoming socially withdrawn, or they're having out of character behavior, one day is okay. Anything greater than 7 days, you need to start looking into what's going on. And if we're getting to the 14 days, you need to, as a coach, find a way to step in. So, trying to find a reason as to why we should be in these uncertain times be going back to sport. And this kind of sums it up. It can change our lives. Coming to that practice can be the highlight and the one positive moment in your athlete's day. You as a coach are going to be a positive and influential role model. We develop character, and those who may not have a voice anywhere else may have a voice in sport. So, in this almost an hour, we've gone through a lot of information, and I want to make sure you guys know that I am here for you. If you have any questions or you're looking for ways to incorporate into prevention, or if you have any more questions in regards to the mental health aspect, so you can contact me at 780-699-8084 or info@eliteinjury.com. And again, you can email that if you want the links. And at the end, one more thing. So this is why we want to be there for our athletes and do this. Sorry, my computer's deciding to not open it in the right. So that is the end of the presentation, and I liked the video that I had found because I know, having gone through this and working on this presentation and working on other return to play policies, it is a lot. And sometimes we need to remember why we're doing this for our athletes. So if anybody has any questions, you can throw it in the chat.